There is an old saying about how a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world can start a storm on the other. Well, history's got its own version of that tale. What if I told you that a battle fought far from our shores between the forces of Islam and Asia sparked a chain of events that dramatically shaped the Europe we know today? It might seem like a distant event with little connection to our everyday lives, but this old skirmish set off a series of changes that are still felt in modern Europe. Intrigued? Sit back and let me take you through how this distant conflict turned the page on Western history forever. After Prophet Muhammad's passing in 632, the Muslim community, led by the first four caliphs, who we now call the Rashidun caliphs, embarked on a series of ambitious campaigns that spanned several decades. Under their leadership, the Muslims expanded their influence dramatically, stretching across the Middle East, North Africa, and even farther. The Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire as it's often called, lost some of its most crucial Middle Eastern territories, including Syria and Egypt, especially after the pivotal Battle of Yarmouk in 636. If you're interested, we've got a video covering that clash in detail. Check out our channel for a deeper dive. On the other front, the once mighty Sasanian Empire, which had stood as a formidable power, was entirely overrun, finally collapsing by 651. When the Umayyad dynasty took over around 661, the expansion didn't miss a beat. The Muslims continued pushing westward, sweeping across North Africa and into the Iberian Peninsula. Meanwhile, in the east, the Umayyads weren't idle either. They advanced into Central Asia. Yet, Central Asia wasn't like the other regions the Arab armies had conquered before. This place was different. A real challenge. Unlike the more unified lands they had subdued earlier, Central Asia was a patchwork of various peoples. You had sedentary Iranian groups living in small kingdoms and city-states. And then there were the Turkic tribes roaming the steppes. The Arabs had to deal with a bunch of petty states, each putting up its own fight. Resistance was fierce and constant, and there were uprisings popping up left and right for the next 50 years. It was a tough nut to crack, but they kept at it, slowly but surely, bringing key oasis cities like Merv, Tashkent, and Samarkand under their control. With Merv as a base, the Arabs pushed further, conquering Bukhara, the Fergana Valley, and reaching Kashgar, near the Chinese-Kyrgyz border. And of course, with all this rapid expansion, it was only a matter of time before they crossed paths with the major powers in the region, China. The Tang Empire was in its heyday back then, extending its influence into Central Asia as well. But unlike the Umayyads, who mostly relied on military might, the Tang had a different approach. They were all about soft power, using trade agreements, alliances, and protectorates to spread their influence without constantly having to fight. It was a smart strategy, and it kept them strong in the region for quite some time. Under Emperor Xuanzong, the Tang dynasty pushed westward and set up shop in some key places. They took over Kashgar in the Tarim Basin, a crucial outpost on the Silk Road. This city became a linchpin for their western expansion, safeguarding trade routes and serving as a major trading hub. The Tang also stretched their influence into Dzungaria, creating a buffer zone to shield their western borders and smooth out trade. And let's not forget the Fergana Valley, rich in fertile land, where the Tang made sure to back local rulers who favored their interests. The Abbasid Caliphate, having toppled the Umayyads in 750, used Khorasan, a key province, as their launchpad to expand its control over Central Asia. Cities like Merv became crucial military and administrative centers under their rule. They didn't stop there. The Abbasids also pushed into Transoxiana, modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, seizing important cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. They extended their reach into Sogdiana as well, covering parts of eastern Uzbekistan and southern Kazakhstan, a region buzzing with trade and cultural exchange. Their goal was not just to overthrow a regime, but to build a new future for the Muslim world. With both empires flexing their muscles, their ambitions collided head-on. They vied for control over the Silk Road, the vital trade route linking the East and West, and the strategic positions in Central Asia. Controlling this vital trade route was key to their supremacy and power, making their rivalry over it a significant historical conflict. Tensions were particularly high in the Fergana Valley, where local disputes intensified the conflict. The Fergana Valley situation became increasingly volatile when its ruler, under pressure from neighboring kingdoms allied with the Tang, sought help from the Abbasids. The Abbasids responded to this call for assistance, while the Tang supported rival factions. What began as a local skirmish between competing factions evolved into a full-blown struggle for dominance in Central Asia, setting the stage for the inevitable conflict. In July of 751, two colossal armies faced off on the flat plains near the Talas River, not far from the city of Talas, situated close to the present-day Kyrgyzstan-Kazakhstan border. As the armies of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Tang Empire prepared for battle at Talas, their formations revealed a striking similarity, a reflection of the shared military strategies that dominated Central Asian warfare at the time. This resemblance was no accident. The Abbasids and Tang were well aware of each other's tactics, having encountered similar military doctrines across Central Asia. Both sides had integrated Turkic mercenaries and auxiliary troops, renowned for their expertise in cavalry tactics, into their ranks. These Turkic warriors brought with them battle strategies that emphasized speed, mobility, and archery, which both the Abbasids and Tang adopted to maximize their effectiveness on the battlefield. The terrain at Talas, characterized by open plains, further shaped the formations, pushing both armies to deploy their forces in ways that allowed for fluid cavalry movements. Leading the charge on one side was Ziyad. This guy was no slouch. He commanded a formidable force, up to 40,000 troops strong. Ziyad placed his archers right at the front. Archers are essential in softening up the enemy before the main clash, sending volleys of arrows to disrupt and demoralize. Right behind those archers, he lined up several rows of spearmen. These men were the backbone of his force, ready to hold the line against any charge. On the flanks, Ziyad positioned a mix of heavy and light cavalry. The heavy cavalry, heavily armored and ready to break through enemy lines, and the light cavalry, quick and nimble, perfect for flanking maneuvers. A good mix of cavalry can make or break a battle. And then, in reserve, Ziyad had a contingent of light cavalry and his own personal bodyguard. These weren't just any bodyguards, mind you. They were heavily armored, the best of the best. Opposing him was General Gao Shanji of the Tang dynasty, a commander of great renown. According to Chinese records, Gao led an army of 30,000 men, but Arab sources claim the Tang forces numbered as many as 100,000. Right at the front, Gao placed his crossbowmen, mixed with regular archers. Those crossbows were deadly accurate and could pierce through even the toughest armor. Behind them, he had his heavily armored Tang spearmen, ready to stand their ground and repel any direct assault. On each flank, Gao had positioned his nomadic mercenary horsemen. These were tough, battle-hardened warriors, skilled in the art of hit-and-run tactics. They were the kind of fighters who could harass the enemy, disrupt their formations, and then disappear before anyone knew what hit them. Further back, Gao kept the Fergana contingent and his own bodyguards. The Fergana horsemen were renowned for their exceptional cavalry skills, and Gao's bodyguards, like Ziyad's, were heavily armored elite troops, kept in reserve to deliver a decisive blow or protect their leader if the battle turned dire. Gao decided to test the waters. He instructed his projectile division to advance and probe the Abbasid defenses for any vulnerabilities. It was a calculated risk, but one that could bring substantial rewards. Ziyad responded in kind, and soon, the battlefield was filled with a flurry of flying projectiles. At this point, the Tang dynasty's superior missile technology came to the fore. The Tang crossbowmen, renowned as some of the finest in the world, unleashed their powerful and highly accurate crossbows. Their precision gave them a distinct edge, gradually pushing back the Abbasid archers as their bolts penetrated the opposing lines. As the battle heated up, Gao knew he had to act fast, so he made a bold move. He sent his spearmen forward, trusting in the Tang Empire's troops, who had been drilled tirelessly for moments just like this. These heavy infantrymen moved in a tight formation that looked almost unstoppable. Right behind them were Gao's mounted mercenaries, ready to jump in wherever they were needed. Ziyad wasn't one to sit back either. He quickly saw the danger and ordered his infantry forward. There were more of them, and he wanted to slow down the Tang advance, giving his cavalry the room they needed to maneuver. It was a classic strategy. Use the infantry to create gaps and let the cavalry deliver the knockout blow. When those two lines collided, the ground itself seemed to shake. The battlefield exploded into chaos, spears thrusting forward, swords slicing through the air, and the deafening clash of metal on metal echoing all around. You could smell the blood in the air, mixed with the dust and sweat of thousands of men locked in deadly combat. It was the kind of brutal, up-close fight where training and discipline could mean the difference between life and death. Gao, always sharp, gave a quick signal, and his cavalry on the flanks charged forward, aiming to encircle the Abbasid infantry. But Ziyad wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. He unleashed his heavy and light cavalry divisions, urging them to relieve the pressure on his foot soldiers and counter the Tang advance. In the center, the Tang spearmen held their ground. Their disciplined formation was like a rock in the storm. They were well armored and had been drilled to perfection, each thrust of their spears pushing back the Abbasid footmen, inch by hard-fought inch. On the flanks, it was just as fierce. Ziyad's heavier cavalry clashed with Gao's nomadic horsemen. The Abbasid cavalry was something to behold, strong and resilient. They stopped those nomads in their tracks. But Gao's mercenaries, though outnumbered and facing a superior force, didn't back down. These weren't green recruits. They were seasoned fighters, veterans of countless battles. Their resolve was unshakable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the battle raged, the governor of Samarkand made a bold move, sending his reserves to strike the flanks of the Chinese infantry, hoping to exploit a weakness. Gao, ever vigilant, quickly countered by mobilizing his own reserves to meet the threat. The clash was intense, with neither side willing to give an inch. Spears clashed, arrows flew, and the battlefield buzzed with the heat of combat. But Samarkand's troops, exhausted and worn down by the relentless fighting, were forced to pull back, giving them a chance to regroup and recover. For the next 2 days, the battlefield was caught in a tense standoff. Sporadic skirmishes and clashes erupted, but neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The soldiers fought bravely, yet the lines remained unbroken, as neither side would give ground. It became a test of endurance, with each engagement further depleting both armies. As the sun rose and set over the plains of Talas, the weary soldiers pressed on through sheer willpower. Eventually, the continuous strain and exhaustion led both commanders to reassess their tactics, leaving the stalemate to drag on. But here's where the plot thickens. Unbeknownst to Gao, Ziyad had been busy behind the scenes. Before the battle even began, Ziyad had established contact with a contingent from one of the Turkic Karluk tribes living in the vast steppes further east. Ziyad's recruitment of these Karluk warriors was a stroke of strategic genius. With their help, he bolstered his ranks and strengthened his position on the battlefield. These were allies who knew the land like the back of their hand, capable of maneuvering swiftly and striking decisively when the time was right. The Muslim commander concealed these reinforcements in the tall grasses along the banks of the Talas River, patiently biding his time. Then, on the 4th day, Ziyad decided the time was right. He ordered his archers and spearmen to advance, supported closely by cavalry. The Abbasid forces moved forward with purpose and determination, their ranks bolstered by the hidden riders, and ready to tip the scales of battle. On the opposing side, Gao and his troops also moved cautiously forward, positioning themselves for the impending clash. The projectile contingents of both armies began exchanging volleys of arrows that darkened the sky. Each side sought to gain the upper hand before the melee began in earnest. In this initial exchange, however, it was the Chinese forces who proved superior. Their projectile units, likely bolstered by their renowned crossbowmen, unleashed a relentless barrage that found its mark with deadly accuracy. The Abbasid archers and spearmen, unprepared for the intensity of the Tang assault, found themselves at a disadvantage. The earth trembled under the weight of the advancing Abbasid troops, a mass of armored infantry moving inexorably toward their enemy. In the center of the battlefield, the infantry of both armies collided with a thunderous roar. Meanwhile, on the flanks, the cavalry divisions engaged in repeated maneuver and countermaneuver. The Abbasid cavalry, skilled and determined, sought to widen their lines and outflank their Tang counterparts. Gao's mounted troops, including his nomadic mercenaries, fought valiantly, but found themselves locked in a static, brutal melee. Any feigned retreat would expose the vulnerable flanks of the infantry in the center, adding to the complexity of the unfolding battle. Just when the battle seemed to teeter on the edge of decision, Ziyad's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos with unmistakable authority. From the dense reeds along the Talas River, the Karluk mercenaries emerged, veteran riders of the steppes, masters of swift and lethal strikes. It was then that the fate of the Tang army was sealed. The Karluks, who had been in the fray for several days, suddenly turned the tide. Chinese sources suggest they had originally fought alongside the Tang, only to betray them halfway through the battle. Yet, the Arab accounts tell a different story, that the Karluks had been allied with the Abbasids from the start. Whatever the truth, the effect was devastating. The Karluks launched a surprise attack from the rear, catching the Tang forces completely off guard. It was the final blow that signaled the collapse of Cao Xianqi's army and marked the beginning of the end for the Tang at Talas. These horsemen, with the wind at their backs and the element of surprise on their side, charged down upon the battlefield like a storm. Their sudden assault took the Tang forces by surprise, disrupting their formations and swinging the momentum in favor of the Abbasids. Amid the confusion, a few Tang officers caught a glimpse of the enemy closing in on their flank. Desperately, they tried to rally their men, scrambling to form a defensive line. But before they could organize, a rain of arrows fell upon them from the east, sowing further chaos and panic. With the Talas River cutting off their retreat, the Karluk riders slammed into Gao's exposed flank. Their impact was nothing short of devastating, carving through the Tang ranks with lethal precision. The left flank of the Tang army crumbled under the onslaught. Fear took hold, and many soldiers, seeing no other way out, broke ranks and fled. Sensing that victory was within his grasp, Ziyad pushed his men to press the advantage. He knew that letting the enemy escape would waste the opportunity they had fought so hard to create. The Abbasid forces pursued the retreating Tang soldiers relentlessly, determined to secure their triumph. Of the tens of thousands of Tang soldiers sent into the fray at Talas, only a small number lived to tell the tale. Among the survivors was Cao Xianqi, though his fate was sealed just a few years later when he faced execution for corruption. The battle left countless Chinese dead, and many others were captured, finding themselves marched off to Samarkand as prisoners of war. After the battle, something truly remarkable happened. The Abbasid forces, having captured Chinese prisoners, came across some skilled papermakers. They brought this revolutionary technology to the Islamic world. Paper was a game changer, far cheaper and easier to produce than parchment or vellum. While parchment and vellum were costly and labor-intensive, paper's affordability drastically reduced production costs by up to 90%. This transformation made documents more accessible and widespread. This new method set off a wave of cultural and intellectual exchange. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its rich blend of knowledge from the Tang dynasty and earlier civilizations, became a hub of scientific and philosophical advancements. They preserved and expanded on classical Greek and Roman texts, and this treasure trove of knowledge eventually made its way to Europe. By the 12th century, around 90% of the classical texts that had been lost in the West were reintroduced to Europe through translations from Arabic sources. The advent of paper allowed European scholars to produce and share more texts, fueling a surge in literacy and education. In fact, the number of books in Europe's libraries increased exponentially. By the 13th century, European book production had risen from a few thousand manuscripts per year to tens of thousands, thanks to the introduction of paper. The translation efforts in places like Spain and Sicily, where Arabic works were translated into Latin, played a crucial role in this transformation. It's estimated that over 1,000 Arabic works were translated into Latin, significantly expanding the European intellectual landscape. It's fascinating how the aftermath of the Battle of Talas, seemingly just a distant conflict, ended up having such a profound impact on European scholarship and intellectual life. The introduction of paper led to a revolution in document production, making knowledge more accessible and paving the way for the Renaissance. This story shows how history can throw unexpected surprises our way. The battle itself might have seemed like a footnote, but its ripple effects, technological advancements and cultural exchanges, led to significant changes in Europe. It's a reminder that history's outcomes are often more complex and surprising than they first appear.